Now, if I'm using concepts to interpret information, I can't avoid making some assumptions. These are universal in thinking. You've got to begin somewhere in thinking. You've got to take something for granted. And so now, as a thinker, thinking about any kind of thinking, I can ask, what's the purpose? What's the central question? Where's the information coming from? How do you interpret that information? What are some of the main concepts? What are you assuming? And furthermore, there are two other things that you can't avoid doing and I can't avoid doing. I can't avoid my thinking having implications. So as soon as I start thinking, that thinking starts generating implications, off in different directions. And so one way to understand any kind of thinking is say, where's it taking us? If we follow this idea through, where are we going to end up? What's the implication of this? What's the implication of that? So that's an excellent question to ask and an important dimension of all thinking. And then finally, I can always say, with respect to your thinking or with respect to my own, from what perspective am I doing this thinking? From what point of view am I interpreting these data? So point of view is always present. Frame of reference, slant, angle. It's always present in thinking. So as a good thinker, I recognize that these universals are present, and I learn to take charge of them. So I'm on the outlook for differing agendas. I'm on the outlook for changes in the question. How are we putting the question? I'm on the outlook for information that is being used, and whether it's good information or not good information or questionable information. I'm on the outlook for how are you interpreting the information, and are you confusing your interpretation with the information itself? There's a lot of work on research into the brain and how the brain functions. But we get that information through somebody's interpretation. We don't get the raw data, or if we had the raw data, we'd probably not know how to interpret it. So somebody steps in and from some point of view with some agenda tells us what it means. And that's where you have to watch out. Because their point of view, their agenda, is going to determine how they interpret it. So as critical thinkers, we're sensitive. Data is one thing, but how you give meaning to it is another matter. And we know when we're thinking we have concepts, so we learn to become sensitive to them and so forth. Okay, now if this is true of all thinking, it's got to be true of evaluation as well. And so now, if we took any discipline, we took biology, or we took archaeology, or we took reading, or we took listening, or any other domain, we could go through this. We could say, what's the central purpose of biology? Why do we have it? You know, why did biology emerge? What's the goal? What are they aiming at? Now let's look at the most important biological or central biological questions. And if you really ask these questions, you're serious about it, what is life? This is a question you want to answer. You've got to go out and get some information, some data. Now, how do biologists go about gathering their data? So we could go through this, and if we answered questions in each of these areas, we would be getting at what I call the logic of biology. We'd have a kind of grasp of the kind of thinking, where that thinking is coming from, what it's based on, where it's going, and we would have a kind of grounding for any course we took in biology. And we would know how to follow up as thinkers. All right, you could do that in reading, you could do that in writing. Think through these various structures in order to get into the logic of reading, or the logic of writing, or the logic of listening, or the logic of shopping, or the logic of parenting. So if I wanted to understand your parenting, I'd say, what's your central goal or purpose as a parent? What are you aiming at? What would you like to happen as a result of your relationship to your children? And then I would say, okay, what are some of the central problems you experience in trying to make that goal a reality? Now we move into the second category. Do you see what I mean? So these are structures that you can use wherever thinking is present to see what I would call the logic of it, the essence of it. fundamentally what is going on, intellectually speaking. So now we're looking at evaluation and assessment today. So what are we fundamentally concerned with? We're fundamentally concerned with the logic of assessment, evaluation. Let's step back and look at it, first of all, in a kind of conceptual way. And this is my overall sense of the concept of evaluation. Because let's look at concept is one of the basic structures. I would suggest to you that in evaluation we are estimating, judging, or trying to determine the significance, worth, or value of someone, something, or some event. In other words, what we're trying to do in our thinking is focus our thinking on something and see how it measures up, how it stands up. Now, if that is our goal, then evaluative questions are always of the form, what is the value of this from this point of view based on these kinds of standards? So we have to, now we can begin to think of the logic of evaluation. To evaluate, you have to have a purpose. You also have to have an object, something to be evaluated. So I can say what exactly is being evaluated and for what purpose. Now, if you're going to evaluate something or someone for a purpose, then you need criteria. So I can always ask, what are your criteria or standards of evaluation that you're going to use? I can ask furthermore, since you're going to, let's look at it logically, here's the thing you want to evaluate. Here are the criteria you're going to use. How are you going to apply these to those? How are you going to apply your standard to the thing you're evaluating? How are you going to go about gathering information about the thing you're going to evaluate and then bringing it together with the standards? How are you going to do that? Let's look at the process you have in mind for gathering data. And of course, if you're gathering data, one of the things we want to look at is, are these data relevant to your purpose? Because one of the mistakes in evaluation could be to state a purpose, gather data that is true of the thing being evaluated, but maybe isn't relevant. There was an essay test that I looked at in which the criteria had to do with reasoning, but the answers that were being picked of high quality didn't have high quality reasoning, though they were amusing, clever, and articulate. But the criteria didn't say how amusing, clever, and articulate. It said how good was the reasoning. So we have to make sure when we're evaluating that we really are evaluating what we say we're evaluating. Students, of course, are very suspicious of the whole process of evaluation, or rather, they think they understand the logic of it perfectly. They think it's a question of preference. So here is what most students think about our evaluation. You give me a high grade, that means you like me. You give me a low grade, that means you don't like me. So if I can sort of be friendly to you and you can sort of get to like me, then that's going to affect my grade positively. But if you, for some reason, find me irritating as a person or personality, my grade is going to be lowered. So then children and students develop this strategy to the extent that they care about their grade of playing up to the teacher. And then other students notice who's doing that. And they sort of think of them as selling out to the herd. You know, okay, you're going with the teacher and you're betraying us, the students. So, of course, then some students are never going to go up and be friendly to a teacher because that would be interpreted as playing up to them for a grade. Okay, this is a confusion of logical domains. Preference and evaluation are not the same thing. Now, I've said students are confused about this, but many teachers are as well. Many teachers are influenced in their grading by how much they like or dislike the student being graded. Find it very difficult to give a low grade to somebody that they find endearing, and very difficult to give a high grade to somebody who has an irritating personality or rubs this person the wrong way. And this is a logical failure on the part of the teachers to discriminate the subjective from the objective, preference from evaluation.